Okay, it is time to make the lining for Elihu that we're going to stuff with the stuffing. You can skip this step if you would like. You don't have to make a fabric lining. You can join Elihu together and just stuff the crochet. That's totally fine. I prefer to do the fabric lining because what I find is the fabric will hold its shape better. This is just an even weave, you know, right and left and up and down weave. It's not anything stretchy or whatever, so it's just a nice even weave fabric that doesn't stretch, and so that will help Elihu keep his shape better because the crochet is just going to stretch so much that it's easier for it to get bumpy and out of shape if you stuff just the crochet than if you make a lining and stuff the lining. And in addition to that, of course, you're not going to have to worry about any of the stuffing popping through any of these little holes here, which I don't really find happens that much if you stuff it well and with a good quality stuffing like the polyfill. But you know, some people do have that problem, especially if you crochet really loosely, or again if you're using a lower quality stuffing that doesn't kind of stay together or has really short fibers or whatever. Okay, so this is actually fairly simple. I sewed the Elihu, this original Elihu lining. I actually hand sewed it together. I'm gonna machine sew this one just because it's so much quicker, but you can of course hand sew as well if you don't have a sewing machine. That's fine. Now I've traced half these pieces and now I'm going to trace the other half. Remember, in my specific case here, yellow is color B and blue is color A. So right here, I've already traced the color B inner leg once, okay? And I traced the yellow one, because you see it says B, which is yellow, and I traced it from the back side. So now I'm going to trace the color A1, and you do, if you have a fabric with a grain that goes up and down and side to side, you do of course want to keep your grains lined up properly. So we have our up and down here. And this fabric, it's just a fabric I found in my stash. I honestly am not entirely sure where it came from. I think it was probably something that somebody de-stashed to me. It was probably not something I bought, but it just seems to be a regular like, you know, cotton poly blend or something. I don't know, but I gave it a wash and a dry and I'm using it for the lining because I thought it was a good fabric for the lining for Elihu here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure to leave a decent amount of space because these lines that I've traced are going to be my sewing lines, not my cutting lines, okay? So I do want to make sure to leave some space so I have room to cut around them. Now I put this piece down with the right side facing the right side of the crochet, facing the right side of the fabric. So I'm looking at the right side of the fabric and I am now looking at the wrong side of the crochet, and I'm just going to trace it. This is not an exact science. I'm using this water soluble pencil. This one is by Clover. I like them. They have a nice soft lead, so they're very easily to trace with. They come in a couple different colors. You can also trace these onto a piece of paper, cut out the paper, and then use the paper as a stencil. Okay, and remember, your two pieces should actually be the same. They're just opposite from each other. So like they should line up. If you put them wrong sides together or right sides together, they should be the same size and shape, right? So you really only need to trace one if you're doing a paper pattern. And just when you trace it on your paper, trace one side and then flip it and trace the other side, because even this leg that may look very, very similar, you can see it's got this little bump here. That's the back side of Elihu because his little booty pops out a little bit. And then here it doesn't have that bump because that's going to go into his neck, okay? So this was color A, right? So I'm going to put a big A here, and then I'm going to put a little tiny B here just so that I remember that's the back, and a little tiny F here so I remember that's the front. Okay, now I already traced color A of the actual Elihu body. So now I had folded my fabric just to make life a little easier. I'm going to unfold it. we're going to trace color B. Let me just double check and make sure that I really did color A. See, that says an A on it. And now with the wrong side up, yes, that is color A. Just wanted to make sure I didn't make a mistake there. Okay, so here we go. We're just going to lay Elihu down here. Wrong side up of color B. Alrighty, and you might say, why don't I just trace it once and fold the fabric in half and cut it out? You can totally do that, except for the reason why I prefer to do it this way is because I'm actually, like I said, I'm tracing the sewing line, not the cutting line. If you trace it and then you cut out too, then you just need to be really careful to make sure that you sew in the correct place. Since I am tracing out the sewing line, not the cutting line, and look, I got to this little marker, right? And I'm just going to put a little line. All right, since I'm tracing the sewing line and not the cutting line, I want that line to be seen on both pieces. So that's why I'm tracing both pieces rather than just folding it in half and cutting out two. I want to see my sewing line. I prefer to have the line that I sew drawn, not the line that I cut drawn. And I guess that's just kind of a holdover from undergrad, because I do have a costume design degree with lots and lots of training on costume technology, costume construction, and that was one of the things we learned was you draw the cutting line, not the sewing line, and that way you're actually sewing on the drawn line. Let's see. Ta-da! I went all the way around. I traced where those two markers were. Now I'm going to pull those lines inside so that they cross over here. And I'm going to put a big old B right here so I know that's color B. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these 4 pieces out. You don't need a lining for the ears, right? Where's my little Elihu here? Here we go. You don't need a lining for the ears. Now if you want to do a fun little colored fabric on like the inside of the ears or whichever side of the ears, if you want to do some sort of fun fabric lining on one side or the other, just because, go for it, have fun. But it's not stuffed, so it doesn't need a stuffing lining. Okay, so I'm going to, he fell off the table. Oh no, I'll get him in a second, he'll be fine. So now I'm just gonna kind of roughly cut around Elihu here, around all of these pattern pieces, making sure that I have enough to sew. It'll probably be about 5/8 of an inch actually is what I'll probably cut, 5/8, half an inch to 5/8 of an inch around. Because like I said, I'm sewing on the drawn line, I'm not cutting on it. Right, so make sure you give yourself a seam allowance, cut everything out, and then we'll talk about sewing it together. So I have all of my pieces of the Elihu lining cut out. Here are my 2 inner leg lining pieces, and that's what we're going to start with. And we're going to sew the 2 inner leg lining pieces together just across the top. So to do that, I just kind of match up my 2 pieces, and I put a pin through the point of one and then the little point of the other. Okay. So pin that point together, and then I go over here and I do the same. I go down through this little point and then back up through this little point. Remember, this is does not need to be exact here. We are not talking exact science. We're just making a little lining here. And then I usually will go ahead and toss another one right in the middle. Make sure, see, because the middle kind of dropped a little bit there because I'm not perfect. There we go, kind of get it through. This would not be an A project in my costume technology class because I am not going for perfection here. We're just going back stitch here, sew across, back stitch here. I'm going to do that on my machine, or you can just sew from here to here using a hand sewing back stitch just from point to point. Whatever floats your boat, have at it, come back, and then we'll press it open and go on to the next spot. Okay, I've sewn the inner leg linings together right here. And now I'm just going to give them a quick press open. Okay, so I just kind of come in from this side. Since it's an arc, I then tend to just flip it around, come in from this side. Okay, so now we're going to take Elihu part B, body B, okay? Turn him over, Elihu body B, flip him over, and then find the side of this that says A. We're going to sew him together from here to here. And we did actually mark that on the other side. Okay, so what you want to do is go ahead and put your pin from the little marker under Elihu's neck, right? We marked this little spot right under his neck. And that goes through to just that little seamed part on his leg linings, and then we have the little marker on Elihu's backside and the little seam bit on the lining again. Okay, and now you're just going to go ahead and continue to pin together all the way around. You actually want to put the pins on whichever side you feel comfortable using. If you're more comfortable putting the pins on this side because that's the side you want to sew on, that's fine. Whichever side works for you. I actually think I am going to go this side so that I can see when I get exactly to that seam. See, look, I make mistakes a lot. Okay. So there we go. I'd rather sew from the lining side, from the inner leg side. So now I'm going to poke myself apparently with a pin. I'm going to keep pinning. I'm going to make sure to put a pin right at this little point through here and here through both sides, making sure I'm not actually sticking my head, top of my head in the camera as I lean over to see what I'm doing. And I'm also going to pin this point through this point on my lining and this point on this lining piece. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure, I let go. I'm just going to make sure to get this pinned in a few places and where I feel like it's nice and secure, and then sew it all together from here to here. All right, and then we will come back and do the same thing on the other half. I've stitched all this, and now I just want to do some clipping. I'm going to clip right into these two inner points, these two 90-degree angles, okay? And what I did was when I stitched those, I actually backstitched here, backstitched here, backstitched here, and backstitched here, just because those can be really the weakest points right there with those corners, especially since we have to clip to them. If you don't clip to them, it won't turn properly, okay? So now we're going to sew the opposite of what we just did. We're taking Elihu body A, flipping it over, and we're going to take Elihu's inner leg inner leg B, Elihu's body A and inner leg B, line them up, and then we're going to pin them and sew them the same way as we had just done on the other side, and then we will come back. Okay, so let me pin them and sew them, and then I'll come back and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I have finished sewing that. I'm just going to clip these inside angles again, these little 90-degree angles, so that it will actually turn properly. Now what we're going to do is just line up the rest of Elihu's body here, okay? All right, I'm going to go this way because what I'm actually going to do, if you're really careful, you can just kind of tuck all of this away. So I just kind of fold this seam allowance this way, okay, just to get it out of my way, and then fold this down right here, All right, and that will get all of that seam allowance out of my way. I'm now going to pin these two little Elihu lining parts together and sew them. Starting here, I'll wrap around, go all the way around the trunk, all the way around the head, and all the way around to just about here. I'm gonna leave this last few inches open because then I'm going to need to turn him and stuff him. So I'm going to sew from here all the way around the trunk, over the head and across the back to right about here. And then I will come back, we will do some clipping, flip him and stuff him, okay? I have Elihu all sewn together from under his neck all the way around here. So I've left this open, this much open, and now we just need to clip some of these inner curves. Okay, so making sure that I don't accidentally clip any of this extra seam allowance over here, I'm just going to cut up, clip into this curve, clip a little bit more into that curve, a little bit more into that curve. Okay, these inner curves, all the inside curves need clips so that they will actually turn. Okay, I think that's about it for inside curves. Yes, it is. So now we're just going to flip him through. All right, so here we go. And ta-da! Elihu, now it is time to stuff him. Okay, so we're gonna get him stuffed nice and tight. I'm not gonna make you watch me stuff him completely, but I do want to point out about this wonderful little stuffing tool. I tend to stuff the trunk first and then the feet. I just start with the farthest point from me, which is the trunk, and then I go to the 4 feet. And then you can stuff the rest of his body. But what I do is I just kind of use my finger to get it most of the way in there, and then I use this stuffing tool. This end has a bit of a point, the other end tends to be flatter. They're not all identical, but usually there's one end with a bit of a point and the other end without. And of course you can just use a chopstick, but I love that the bags of polyfill polyfill all come with the little stuffing tool. Okay, so you can get that pushed down right all the way into the tip of his trunk nicely, and then keep on going, fill up all of his trunk and his 4 legs, get him stuffed really firmly, and then we will come back here. You will end up having something that goes ah, and you'll be all sorts of confused. So when I get to that point, I'll come back and make sure you understand how to deal with that, okay? Okay, so here we have a not so attractive stuffed Elihu lining, and it looks really weird. I promise, it's okay. This one looked really weird too when it was just like this, okay? Like if his legs are really splayed out, like completely like this, you might need to get a little more stuffing pushed down the outside of his legs, but they will splay out a bit. We're going to fix this, okay? We're gonna pull this in with some stitches to make him stand up better, and it'll all make a big difference once he's finished. Now you probably have a little hole under his neck right here, and that's fine. You can hand stitch that together if you want, or you can ignore it. I'm probably gonna ignore it because once I put the outside on, it's just like that because of the way that we sewed it. That's fine. And then of course you have a big opening back here. You can pull these together and sew them on the sewing machine, just top stitch them if you want. I actually find that it is just easier to hand stitch it. So I kind of just smush it down and hold it together. And I have this needle that I have threaded up with just the thread that I used on my sewing machine, that's all. Same exact thread as on my sewing machine. And I tied a knot in the end. And what I usually do is, because it's doubled and I tied a knot in the end, I actually run the needle through the little loop right at the knot, so that when I pull it tight, the knot is actually, I've made a little loop here. I don't know if you can see that, but I've made this little loop by pulling my needle through. Okay, I pulled the needle through the 2 layers of the yarn right by the knot. So when I pull it, the knot is actually, the knot isn't going to just pull right through the fabric and then have everything unstitched, okay? So that's why I do that. And that's something I basically do with all my hand stitching. And now I'm just going to whip stitch this backside shut. I'm not going to worry about how neat and pretty it is because we're not going to see it. It's a lining, right? That's the wonderful thing here. This is just a lining. You just want to whip stitch it shut so that it stays shut and the stuffing stays inside and all of that. No big deal, no big stress. We do not need to have perfection someplace where nobody's going to see it. All that matters is that it's sturdy, right? It doesn't have to look beautiful. It needs to serve a purpose. Make sure, what I did beforehand was I made sure and kind of pulled all of that fabric out and then folded it just along the line that I had drawn. Be careful, make sure you don't have like, you know, a couple inches worth of fabric folded over and then he'll have a saggy bottom. Nobody likes a saggy bottom, right? All right, so we're almost done here. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I crack myself up at least. All right, we're getting there, getting there. Okay, maybe I put a little more thread on than I needed to, but you know. Oh, well. All right. Now, I promise I do have a degree in this. Okay, and then when I make my knot, what I do is I go through just a little bit of the fabric, and I just put my needle about halfway through, and then I wrap the thread around the needle, and if I call thread yarn, I'm sorry, occupational hazard. I wrap the thread around the needle a couple times, probably like 3 times, and then I just kind of pinch it, and you know, I hold that thread down, and I pull the needle and all of those wraps turn into a knot. And then I usually just kind of thread it through a little ways again, just to kind of hide the end. I find my scissors, which I seem to have, did you get all of that? I find my scissors, which I seem to have buried, and give them a little cut. Give it a little cut. There we go. All right, so here we go. Ta-da! Now that his backside is sewn shut, we need to do something about giving him a little more shape here, okay? Making this kind of come in so that he stands up a little better. And so for this, you want a long, sharp needle. You don't want it to be too thick, but you don't want it to be so thin that you're gonna bend it. They actually make doll making needles for this exact purpose. This is not a doll making needle. A doll making needle is usually like 4 or 6 inches long. They're pretty long and they're sturdy. But this one works well. My great grandmother was a seamstress, and this was in all of the stuff that I was given when she passed away. So I have some really nice needles that are hard to come by now. Okay, so now you want to pull off about like 3 yards probably of thread. So I'm just going to pull off about 3 yards of thread. Okay, and then going to cut that. And then you want to fold it in half, so just find both ends. Okay, so I have one end, I'm pinching one end and I'm pulling the other end through. There we go, I found both ends. And usually the nice thing about these giant needles is they usually have a nice big eye, so they're really easy to thread. So you're putting 2 pieces of thread through it. Ta-da! That was super easy. And now pulling it again so that it's doubled with the 2 pieces of thread. There we go. So I have my 2 ends and my halfway point. I'm just going to kind of line them up. There we go, nice thick yarn. Okay, now what I do to make my knot is I hold on to all 4 of those ends, the 2 ends in the doubled section. I place my needle over top of it, so I'm kind of just sitting on top of all those ends of thread. And then I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle twice. When it's not 4 layers like this, when it's only 2 layers of thread, I usually wrap it around 3 times. Now I'm just pinching where all of that thread is, and I'm going to pull the needle through, but keep a hold of the thread and just keep on pulling through, and that will make this pretty little knot. Okay, that's how I always tie my knots at this point. Now, to secure Elihu's little belly, to give him a tummy tuck, I'm just going to sew through either side of this little seam right in between his 2 front legs. Okay, so I just sewed through in between his 2 front legs, and now I'm going to go through the thread so that I have 2 pieces of thread on either side of my needle, and I've secured that knot. Okay, that way the knot won't pull through. Now I'm taking my needle and I'm going to go all the way through Elihu. This is why a doll making needle would rock, because you want to get it all the way through Elihu. The other one was smaller, so it was easier. Oh my gosh, I did it. Thankfully, stuffing is malleable. Okay, so I get it all the way through Elihu to his seam in the center, and I grab it and I pull it through. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I actually did that. Okay. And now I'm gonna go back in just right kind of next to that. But I'm gonna go back down at an angle because I want to try to come out a little closer to the center of his belly this time. And let's see if I can do that. I'm using the table to help me, but I'm not letting go of the end of my needle because I don't want to lose the needle. This is very futzy. Okay, there we go. Close enough. Close enough to center. Okay, and so now I'm pulling that tight. Okay, and you can see it kind of pulled more. I pulled his back in more than his belly in, but that's okay. I'm going to now kind of push. There we go. I'm going to push his feet up to help get that shaping there. Now back down just past where I came out in the center of his belly, and back up to his back, closer to the back side, but not too close. Nope, I had it, there it is. Okay, whew. It was just that center one that was really a pain. Now I want to really push this down as I tighten it, okay? There, see how much better it's looking? And now we're almost done. Now I'm going to go back down again. Here, and then through to right in between his 2 little legs. His 2 back legs, right in between his 2 back legs. There we go. Got it. It's just that one was really a pain. Okay, and again, I'm going to push this down as I pull it tight. And I'm going to try to catch just some of the fabric here, okay, while I'm keeping that pressure on, just trying to kind of secure things a bit. I'm keeping the pressure on and pulling the thread and just gonna run it through the fabric a couple times in the hopes of kind of securing this tight pull that I have, okay, so that when I go to tie the knot, everything doesn't untuck. So I'm just kind of sewing through little tiny pinch of this fabric, sewing through a little pinch of the fabric a couple times. There we go, in the hopes of making it stay so that I can tie a knot. So now I'm sewing through a little pinch of the fabric one more time, and this time I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle a couple times to make a knot and pull it through, and then just sew it through a big chunk of the fabric to hide the end of my thread. Pull it through again, clip it. All right, I hope that chaos worked for you. Now I'm going to really push this in, okay, and kind of hold his legs together so that I can kind of get all of that. I want the shaping to go in on the stomach, not so much in on the back. All right, so now Elihu has 2 dimples on his back, and so does the other Elihu. If you were to take his outside off of his stuffing, he would have 2 little dimples on his back as well, but you can see that his legs now go straight down, and he has this little inside of his belly and everything. So he will now fit inside his body better, and all of this shaping will look better when the actual crochet pieces on it and such. Okay, so there you go. Okay, if those dimples on the back were really bothering you, especially if you used a yarn when you crocheted Elihu, if you used a yarn that was larger than a DK weight, then you might want to then you're going to probably have bigger dimples, and you might want to cover them up a little bit. So what I did was I just cut out an oval of the fabric, placed it along Elihu's back, and just I just whip stitched it on. I hand tucked the edges in and whip stitched it on. Okay, so you can see I just put it right around here. Okay, just gave him a little extra back piece here. And then I have just a little bit of this stuffing, and I've left this open right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and stuff those dimples. Okay, I did not do this on my original Elihu piece because he was small enough that those dimples weren't that big. But when I did this one using the bigger yarn and therefore ending up with a bigger Elihu, those dimples were kind of bugging me. So you can see that I already bumped it out a little bit. And remember that crochet is stretchy, so it will kind of conform to the shape that you make your lining. It will conform a little bit. So all I've done here is just kind of rounded out his back a little bit. Okay, so you can see that here's the side I've already sewn. It just kind of rounded out his back a little bit and filled in those dimples. And now I'm just going to continue whip stitching this around. Okay, so here I'm just going to keep on whip stitching this around until I get, I caught his trunk, until I get all the way around it, and that way his back will be a little more round, and I don't have to worry about those dimples that were so much more obvious on this larger version of Elihu than they were on the smaller one. All right, so there you go. You can see, again, not rocket science here, guys. Crafting does not have to be stressful. It does not have to be rocket science. And by all means, improvise. That's all this was. This was me improvising. I was working on this pattern for the tutorial for you guys, and I went, man, when I made this bigger, it really, those dimples were much larger. I think we might need to do something about that. And so I improvised, right? No worries. It's totally cool. Go with it. Think on your feet. Figure out how to solve a problem. Okay? A lot of crafting and having fun is just coming up with creative and fun ways to problem solve. So here we go. Look at that. My little Elihu now has a much rounder back, no more dimples, but his little legs go ahead and come together. So now we'll go ahead and work on the crochet outside.